Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. After big rumours over the last couple of days that Mercedes engine development is moving in a very good direction, people are wondering how's Red Bull's aerodynamic development for the RB20 coming on. You might expect, given the dominance of the RB19, Newey will simply design an evolved version of this year's car. Rumour has it though that Newey has an entirely new idea and will revolutionise part of next year's aerodynamics. If this works out as Newey and his team intends, Red Bull will almost certainly be unbeatable again next season. But if it doesn't work as planned, it might well open the door as there is some immediate risk to going down this different design philosophy. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. This is one of the curbs for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and it's going to be the razzmatazz you might expect. Ferrari actually introducing a kind of 1970s-esque design on their race suit and also on the car. They've got a new livery they revealed here today, which is going to be, you know, this kind of nice looking white and red idea on this Ferrari. And we know that it's going to be, well, it's going to be an event, isn't it, in Las Vegas? Whether it's going to be good, whether the Ferrari pit crew are going to be hitting the casino in terms of what strategies they're going to be employing at the weekend. It's also been confirmed pretty much that the driver introductions will return. Not that this is a massive surprise. We saw it in Miami. Many of the drivers were like, are you serious, guys? As were the fans. And it will be back for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. So I cannot wait. And Brundle's grid walk is likely going to be one for the ages. If you do still want to attend, ticket prices have gone down considerably compared to, especially when they were started to launch them. I think understandably, people don't really have the money to splash insane cash right now on these ticket prices. Hotel prices as well have dropped massively because initially they were like, oh, we can charge this. Turns out they can't charge this for various reasons in the current climate. And the current get-in prices, okay, still expensive for race day for sure, but you know, for qualifying on Friday, for example, down 62% compared to what they're advertising on the 8th of October, which is not all that long ago, 1 month ago, right? And they've gone down by pretty much half. So if you do still want to go, then, well, the opportunity is there for a more reasonable fee compared to what you might have thought, but still not cheap compared to some other races, you know. You can go to the Indy 500 for $100 basically, for example. Now, this was a big talking point of today, Haas and their intention to introduce this right of review after what they believed was clear evidence of track limits violations at the US Grand Prix. Now, they weren't wrong. There was clear evidence of track limits violations. The problem is this evidence was only really from onboard cameras. If you guys aren't familiar with the story, this is the US Grand Prix Turn 6. During the Grand Prix, the CCTV camera at this corner was not set up correctly, and therefore the stewards could not see on their cameras any of the track limit violations. Drivers were cutting the inside, as you can see Sergio Perez doing right here, and they were getting away with it because the drivers weren't getting penalised by the stewards. Haas said, hey, hang on a second, all these guys went outside of track limits so many times, this should be punished, and they might have a fair point. The issue is that in order to cause a right of review and to make this a successful appeal, they have to bring new evidence to the table in a considerable fashion, and basically the FIA told them to get lost because they, I guess, already had those pieces of footage from the onboard cameras, and the difficulty is that while sure you might see a driver clearly go outside of track limit on the onboards, it's not necessarily the best way to do it, is it? Because some drivers wouldn't have been in the vision of anyone else's onboard, and even their own onboard doesn't fully show whether their rear tyres are out. So the drivers where you can see it more clearly are when there's someone else following them, and you can see from their onboard they're out of track limits. But even then, the quality isn't quite as good. And for various reasons, it's not particularly plausible to really start deleting lap times and all this type of stuff when you've only got selective data from selective onboard shots. It's a bit of a mess, and I guess the stewards, they probably had that footage at the time. It's not like the footage was not known to them, but I guess the realization was they can't realistically do that much about it because it's just too many inconsistencies at play. Now, they did admit, actually, in rejecting Haas's bids that, yeah, it's a bit of a shambles, and they did admit that their track limits policing is completely unsatisfactory. So they did say, okay, yeah, Haas, you make a fair point. We messed up on this one, and those lap times should have been deleted, but unfortunately, at least for Haas, given the circumstances, it wasn't really feasible to actually do so because you can delete certain lap times, but even if you're going to start deleting lap times and putting track limits penalties in, you're not going to get all of them, and you know you're not going to get all of them, so it's a bit of a problem. Haas eventually, well, they're taking L's left, right and centre lately. Even their upgrades haven't worked. Apparently they confirmed this, that Hulkenberg says, yeah, it's basically chalked, so it ain't looking good for them going into next season either, and even their attempts to get some more points from this appeal failed as well. Just quickly on the Las Vegas Grand Prix, we've seen here some images going around of people on what is kind of like the back straight, the strip or whatever, what this will be looking like, and George Russell will be taking an entirely new engine for this Grand Prix. Big talking point, of course, because his engine overheated towards the end of the Brazilian Grand Prix. This decision confuses me, I've got to say. Why Mercedes didn't take a new engine for Russell last week? This is within the allocation, right? This year we haven't really had any penalties, mainly because there's been 4 engines allocated now. Instead of last year there was 3, so basically everyone took a 4th and took some penalty at some point. This year they've been allowed 4 and additional components elsewhere. So Russell was still on his 3rd, and they decided not to put his 4th one in for Brazil, which is a little bit confusing because you guys probably remember what happened when Hamilton had a brand new engine in Brazil back in 2021. He used it to rather good effect that weekend. The idea that Russell was on a very worn out engine in Brazil to such an extent that at the end of the Grand Prix it wasn't really, it wasn't up to scratch, and it basically overheated to the point where Russell had to come in and retire the car. Sure, could Russell have managed it better? Possibly. He'd have been barely getting any points anyway, but yeah, Riccardo Mosconi from Mercedes confirms that the power unit in Interlagos was its last weekend's, and he's now got a brand new one for the last 2 races. I guess maybe he says a differing power units, maybe it's one that's already been used that they're bringing back into the pool, so maybe it's not brand new. But if it is brand new, you're thinking, well, are Mercedes confident that they're going to be good at Las Vegas, so they're just going to bring this brand new power unit to be used on that long straight, which will be, it's going to be a heavy power circuit with that straight here, given the drag that Mercedes also suffer with. They're going to want to ensure they've got the freshest power unit possible for this race. So if they are putting a brand new engine in with 2 races to go, it's a bit confusing, isn't it? Like, surely you'd have used it with 3 races to go. You've got 24 odd races. You'd think you might split it up 6 or whatever. If they've got a brand new one still ready for George, then, yeah, don't know what that means. But as Mosconi says, it's possible that it's just an older one that he's going to put back into the pool for the last couple of races. Now, let's talk about this Red Bull situation, because lots of people wondering, are Red Bull going to nail it again next year? They've dominated this season. Verstappen's won basically every single race. I mean, he's won, 15 of the last 16, 16 of the last 17, something ridiculous like that. People want to know, will he be challenged next year? Will there be any other competitors? Now, Eddie Jordan, who is, maybe sometimes known to exaggerate certain things, he says that he was at a function with Adrian Newey. This is actually quite a while ago, October the 19th, this came along, that Adrian had been talking to him. They often cycle together and stuff, and says that basically Red Bull are evolving in such a way that it's going to be very difficult for anybody else to catch up with. Now, this isn't, it's not rocket science to figure this out, is it? It's pretty clear that Red Bull are doing an incredible job, and their car this season is so good, and they stopped development on it so early that they almost certainly will have the strongest car next year. Question is, can anyone challenge next year's RB20, or is it going to be 2023 season Mark II, as it might well be? That depends on how much better next year's car is. And this is a very interesting article here that hit the Gazzetta yesterday, discussing how Newey and his team are attempting to, honestly, not just evolve the RB19, but frankly revolutionize the RB19 into the RB20, which is a very interesting decision if this is true, because as you might expect, you will simply take the current concepts of the RB19, which will go down in Formula 1 history as one of the greatest cars ever, and simply take those concepts to their extreme, try and extract every single piece of performance from the current RB19 as you can, and that's probably going to be good enough to win most races next season. But this is the thing, every other team on the grid will be looking at the RB19, trying to replicate the RB19, and there will be many RB19-esque looking cars in various colours up and down the grid, I am sure, next season. So Red Bull can either take that to the extreme and more than likely still have the fastest car, or they can try and go next level with it. And this is the thing, we might have expected before this season began, and certainly at the moment, that, well, surely there isn't too much more performance in the RB19. That philosophy, that concept that Red Bull have nailed, from the suspension to the floor to, let's just say the downwash concept on the side pod, stuff like this, they've got it so right, there can't be that much more performance in there. Surely another couple of tenths maybe, but at that point you're at effectively the performance ceiling of that concept. That might be true, but Newey thinks there's an even even better concept. And this is the risk that other teams have. They can copy the RB19, they can copy Red Bull, they can do what they can to catch up. But Red Bull may have realized that actually what they've currently got isn't even near what it could be. And they've got new ideas to take it to an even another level, such that, let's say Mercedes have a great car next year, which is similar to the RB19 in many respects. Red Bull have already realized, given that they've used the RB19, that actually they can do even better than that. And they've got other ideas on the way. So this is what the article describes, that the vertical load in the car will be straight up a different aerodynamic concept. It will be generated and distributed in a radically different way than now. The floor will function differently, adopting a very different volumetric conformation of the Venturi tunnels at the bottom of the floor. So, the images you might get when Sergio Perez bins it might not be relevant if next year's floor is entirely different. Going on to say that Pierre Vacher and obviously Adrian Newey are more than likely cooking up an absolute masterclass. He reckons that the key point of this, the author, is that based on this different load distribution and the way that it's generating the downforce, the effects of gusts of winds will be less relevant. This was a bit of an issue that Max, to be fair, Max doesn't have too many issues to suffer with, but when he does, he makes it very clear on the radio, and often, talks about gusts of winds affecting the car and stuff like this. And some cars are, I think, is it the Williams that's kind of been known to be rather wind sensitive. Some cars are quite wind sensitive, others are not. The Red Bull is not especially wind sensitive really, but it's probably somewhere on the scale, and they would like it to be not wind sensitive at all if possible. And by changing in this way, the belief is that the effects of gusts of wind, which could potentially throw off the RB18 and the RB19, will effectively be irrelevant to the RB20. He closes out the article as follows: while opponents struggle to chase Max Verstappen currently, Red Bull seems to already be ready to introduce countermeasures of the highest level in order to dominate again. These were kind of the full quotes in the article describing how this has occurred, and we pretty much went through them most over the last couple of minutes to significantly address the weak points of the RB19. But it's nonetheless, it's interesting though. You might expect them to take it to the extreme. What they're going to do instead is apparently bring some aerodynamic revolution to the car. Now, has Newey taken an L yet? No, right? I mean, I trust Newey's judgment on what's the best idea in this ground effect era. But if you are to revolutionize elements of the most dominant car, one of the most dominant cars in Formula One history, there is an element of risk, right? I mean, they could take the RB19 and maximize every single piece. That's the RB20. But if they're not doing that, there's surely more risk. There's more rewards, but surely there's also more risk. If you're changing the way the floor works, you're changing the way the aero works, there is a risk that you've got something wrong, that you've not accounted for something, and that Red Bull could actually take a step back. It's unlikely, let's be honest. The more likely possibility is that Newey's got it right again, and they will be on absolutely unstoppable form once again next season. Verstappen's going to win 95% of the races. But I think, as a fan of good competitive Formula One, even accepting the fact that Verstappen is more than likely going to win next year's championship regardless, such is his consistency in the performance of that car, it would still at least be nice to see a season like this not happen again for a very long time and actually have multiple different winners. That might happen if Red Bull get this wrong to some degree. And they could, given that it's meant to be a revolution rather than simply an evolution. But other teams have to revolutionize as well. And if Red Bull got this right, then there's no doubt they are going to win everything for the next 2 seasons. Like if Newey's got this right about this, revolutionary different way of distributing the aero vertical load or whatever, that apparently he thinks he can do a much better job at than even what they've done on the RB19, they're definitely going to win everything next year, and they'll definitely win everything the year after that, because certainly coming into 2025, all the teams will be pretty much entirely focused on the 2026 regulations that are changing dramatically, as we saw just yesterday. So what other team has a chance? This is the problem. Other teams will try and catch up to the current Red Bull, and Red Bull will take further steps. If those steps are small, then probably they still win the championship, but there'll probably be some other race winners, such as maybe McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari. Who knows how Aston Martin can do, for example, next season. If those steps are big, as Adrian Newey thinks they might be, they're going to win everything again. But if they are intending to be big, but they've actually made some sort of miscalculation somewhere, then all of a sudden we might have a title fight on the hand. So, you might look at this, if you're a Red Bull fan, as being a massive positive that Newey's come up with something magical again, but it's also probably the only chance that we get a good season next year is if they try this and it fails. And it might do, but more than likely it will not. Max Verstappen, of course, last year, winning all the races that he won, looked like that was going to be tough to top this year, but he's done so emphatically. He's now won 17 of the 20 races this season, by far the highest win percentage in a season, and well, he now secures that record over Roberto Ascari from 1952, and, well, likely he will go 19 for 22 at this rate. This is another interesting measure of just how good the car has been. Of course, let's say the McLaren MP4-4, the 1988 McLaren, it led 1,003 laps over the course of the season. That was broken by Mercedes in 2016 at 1,055, and in 2023, Red Bull have now gone one further. Now, sure, there's more races, that of course is why, but in terms of a percentage, the McLaren in 1988 led 97.3% of all their possible laps, which is emphatic, but at the same time, you got to realise that was driven by Prost and Senna, so, you know, it's not quite Prost and Senna, a little bit different to Verstappen and Perez in terms of strength of partnership, and let's say when Verstappen wasn't leading, if Perez was as good as, if not pretty similar to Verstappen, this number probably should be higher than it is, but nonetheless it is a remarkably high figure, and probably does a realistic job of getting across the dominance of some of these cars with respect to their competitors. So very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.